Welcome back, everyone, from the long weekend. We hope that you had a most fantastic rights day, human right all over the place, and that, you enjoyed the long weekend. I am here today, Nicholas Lorimer, your host for the Daily Friends Show, back with two of our most interesting and lively panelists. So it's going to be difficult, I think, to fit this all in the half an hour that we have. But of course, we have Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you, sir?
Very well. Feeling very rested. It was so overcast on Human Rights Day that I just snoozed.
Yes, no, it actually was a lovely day if you have a nice warm place to relax. And of course, we also have Mr. Hermann Pretorius, who was ill last week, but he's back with us now. Hermann, I trust you are better, sir.
Yes, but looking at myself on my little screen there, I'm about as pale as an NP cabinet, but I mean, there's very little I can do about that.
Shots. You just take shots and then you blush.
Yeah, very much like the
NP. Yes. Hermann, I must also remind you that your hair looks fine and there's no need for you to fiddle with it during the show.
It's a nervous tick. I mean, I've got the problem of being both unattractive and narcissistic. You know what a bad hand life dealt me with that. In the sense that I constantly have to face my own face and realize it's nothing near what I want it to be. Why else do you think I'm doing this job? I'm saving for the plastic surgery. Anyhow, let's...
Yeah, so donate to the IRR so that we can pay Hermann more so we can get plastic surgery. But anyway, so our first story for today is rather self-indulgently about ourselves, because I think we would all agree here that it's worth talking about as fairly emblematic of the ways that things are kind of wrong about how we talk about race in South Africa. So as anyone who follows the show knows, they know that Gabriel went before the Human Rights Commission to be human writing and in a discussion about racism in advertising. And Gabriel made the point that, well, there isn't that much racism in advertising. Now, Gabriel, I'll let you explain that fully as we go on. But following this, he was called for a discussion on PowerFM with Faith Mangope, who's one of their big anchors there. And the discussion was, at points, I think, fairly lively. But it ended with Gabriel criticizing a caller who had called in and said there are no adverts where white women are shown in sanitary towel adverts, sanitary pad adverts, and that the implication is that white women are never unsanitary, but only black women are. And Gabriel said, this is not true. I know because I have a relative who is in fact in a sanitary pad advert, and so it's definitely not just one race that gets depicted in these adverts. Well, Faith took a very strong issue with this. She said that he was being condescending. She said that he was playing down the caller's lived experience, that she was insulting our people. Listening to the interview, it sounds a lot like what she meant by our people was black people, not our listeners. She made that clear in a rant at the end, and she ended up kicking Gabriel out of the studio. Now, on one hand, I kind of understand. Gabriel is sometimes a lot of fun to argue with, but it can get frustrating when you're sort of an hour and a half in over 2 beers. And yet, it was, from my, as far as I'm concerned, completely outrageous that he was kicked out like that. I think that it shows a kind of silly fragility. And anyway, let me not pontificate anymore. Gabriel, why don't you tell us where I'm right, where I'm wrong here? What exactly happened to you? Why do you think you were kicked out? And what does it say about the conversations around race in the country at large?
Yeah, so it was always going to be a difficult conversation. And I was really glad that PowerFM, they first called me up to say, you want to do like a little 10 minutes, which really always means 7 minutes sort of interview. And then you just have enough time to mention some talking points, say some data points, and then usually callers phone in and the hosts pontificate. Yeah. And
there was also another guest as well, right? It was Gail from the Advertising Complaints Board.
Advertising Regulatory Board. the head of the
Yeah.
Advertising Regulatory Board. Yeah, so in fact, there was a third panelist who we never got to hear, who's in the advertising industry, but it was mainly Gail and I. And I was really glad that they gave us an hour, and it was a long conversation. And I think that there were points of commonality. For example, where Faith was being very fair to me, Faith Mangope, the host. For example, Gail said, the first thing that I said was, we hired some market trackers to tell us how many adverts have there been since 2013, because that's when the terms of reference for the Human Rights Commission's investigation into racism in advertising starts. Now, they just did 2021, and we found they tracked 10 million flighted ads. It's like, 8.5 on TV and 1.5 on radio and 100,000 on print, something like that, adding all up to 10 million ads. And then we said, if that's about the average going back to 2013, let's say from 2013 to 2021, 8 years, 80 million adverts. And only 5 appear in the terms of reference under the accusation of being racist. Now, I said, if 5 South Africans are racist out of 50, 60 million, then we've won, okay? If there are only 5 racist South Africans, that is victory. I think it's utopian to have this perfection standard. If there are only 5 racist South Africans left, that's amazing.
Just for reference, more South Africans have leprosy than 5. So it would be racism in that circumstance would be rarer than leprosy.
Which is, I didn't even know that still existed. So there you go. Okay. So, and I said, but of course, if there were 5 racist ads, we need to condemn those 5 racist ads. The reason there's going to be so little is because people are condemning it. That being said, I don't even know if any of those ads were racist. So the Dove ad, Faith mentioned incorrectly, saying, correctly. One of the ads was this Dove ad where a black woman is there and then she takes off her shirt and she becomes a white woman, which sounds kind of racist. Wear this soap and you will literally become a white woman. Maybe not racist, but pretty edgy. That's not the whole ad. That's the only bit Faith mentioned, but that's not the whole ad. Because the next thing that happens is the white woman lifts up her shirt and she becomes an Asian woman. East Asian, and then she lifts up her shirt and she becomes Central American, and she lifts up her shirt and she becomes Indian, South Asian, and then she lifts up her shirt and she becomes Aztec, and she lifts up her shirt and she becomes black, and she lifts up her shirt and she becomes a red-headed person. It's all of the races are there, and some of them twice, and so on. And actually, my partner drew attention to this. She was listening to the first part of the radio interview. She was like, dude, it's outrageous that Faith is still just mentioning this first bit to make it seem so racist. She should read the piece by the black actress who starts that campaign, for whom this was a breakthrough moment. And she loved the ad. She thought it's about how we all have souls that are the same inside, and our skins are kind of like clothes. And imagine if we could just change our clothes, how that would sensitize people to what really matters, which is the stuff inside. But at the same time, your skin matters, and everyone can improve their skin by using better beauty products. And this is what Dove offers. This is her idea about the ad. And people have just sort of taken the first scene and pretended like that's the whole thing, and humiliated her and sort of implied that she's a house N-word or an Uncle Tom or a fool or something, and it's really demeaning. Anyway, this is getting into the weeds, but the point is, the other racist ad is a Chicken Licken ad where a black dude called Big John sails in 1375 to the Netherlands and discovers that these people don't know how to read a map, that they don't have
names
a name.
the continent Europe.
Calls them Europe because there's some guy who's about to be hung who's got a rope around his neck. It's a silly flippant ad. They say it's racist because it's belittling the terrible experience of colonialism and slavery that shackled all South Africans.
It's poking fun at it.
Yes. So, I guess Mel Brooks is racist because he as a hilarious Jew made fun of Hitler in The Producers. The point is, and then the Clicks ad, the hair ad, was the most scary one, but the Equality Court exonerated it precisely by saying, again, it had been cropped. If you see the whole thing, there's a black woman and a white woman on top that are described as having beautifully natural hair. And then you've got the hair products for people whose hair is too dry or too flat or too this or too that. Anyway, so I was there to just say this, guys, look, we've done well. Let's be proud. Our advertising industry is living in 2035. It's ahead of the rest of the country. And I said the problem is our politicians are living in 1985. And so, when you read the newspaper it's like Rainbow Nation is dead, Rainbow Nation is dead, Rainbow Nation is dead. Apartheid lives on. White people are being brutalized. Black people are being brutalized. White people are in charge of everything. Then you get to the advertising section, and it's like beautiful black couples going fly fishing and sort of buying orchids at Woolworths, and feels a lot like in the Human Rights Commission in Rosebank, the rooftop bar where I took photos of, the people drinking 75 Rand Heineken drafts looked exactly the way you think they look.
Have you wondered what your tax money is spent on?
Licorice all sorts, dude. It's licorice all sorts at the creamy top, as the Indians call the top layer of the socioeconomic system. So I was saying there's good news about that. There's terribly bad news, which is that advertisers are increasingly trying to sell products that people can't afford to buy because of 2 million extra unemployed people since the pandemic, and no growth in the 10 years before that, the 12-year, 14-year, 16-year lockdown. Okay, so this was the general thing. And then, as you said, there's the specific thing about the sanitary pads that kind of set Faith off. But I think if you listen to the rants afterwards, and during our conversation, she did talk about our people sometimes as listeners, but then, as you say, sort of clarified she really did mean black people towards the end there. I think that is kind of at the heart of it, is the sense that it's immoral or it's taboo for a white dude, which is how I imagine Faith considers me, to be criticizing a black dude, which is how I imagine she considers that caller, and to do so in public. And my counter argument was that, and I really believe this, and it is why I'm so irritating Nick and Hermann, and I know Hermann believes this too, that it's a human thing to criticize people. And I said this in the show. I said, she said, you have a problem with this guy. You think he's got a problem? I said, probably not. Like, I think he didn't know something. He's only seen 1 or 2 ads. And I'm not an expert about all the ads, but I know this. So I've informed him. So now he's pashash. Now he's shap. And then we cut to ad break. And I could see the producer was kind of happy. And I thought Faith would be happy. But then we came back and she was very, very unhappy.
Right. He was making a factual claim about the way that advertising is done on TV. And you said, here's some counter evidence that suggests that what you said was not factually true.
Yeah. I could have been heavy and said, dude, I think this guy's got a problem with women menstruating. He sounds like he needs to get comfortable with the fact that we as human beings are kind of messy creatures, and the human and the, if he wants to be on like a pretty woke channel, he should know that like woman is no longer an acceptable word. You're supposed to say human beings that bleed out of their vaginas. That is actually the woke term. I know because I went to Princeton and so I watched the lectures that are being given. But I didn't go there because I think that would be condescending and mean and I'm not sure whether that's his problem or not. So I was trying to be friendly, and then she kicked me out of the studio. And then I'm just really glad that Pastor Jonas phoned in and said, Faith, I don't think that's cool. And that on Twitter, PowerFM listeners on Twitter came up and stood up for me. And I think that there is something in there, when we're friendly and when we're serious, we are not alone.
Yeah. No, exactly. Hermann, you haven't had a chance to listen to the thing, but you've heard us talk about it a bit. What is your takeaway from all of this?
Well, I have had a chance to listen to it. I just haven't had the guts because, as I was saying to Gabriel just before the show, it drains the soul to listen to stupid people making stupid arguments, receiving a respectful, substantive, well-reasoned reply, and then going mad like an idiot. It just drains. I couldn't listen to it yet. It's why you just avoid some things for your own health. But the only thing I really can say, and I mean, Gabriel said it all out so beautifully. The only thing I can say is racism is not dead, but it is on life support, kept alive by politicians, race hustlers, and people who get a sense of superiority by denouncing others as racist. Thomas Sowell.
No, well said. The thing that makes me, the reason I get so upset is, and it's exactly if anyone who's on Faith's side in this argument is going to say if they watch this video or listen to this podcast, is they're going to say, oh, well, look, it's just 3 white men complaining about being put in their place by a black woman. And the racialization of arguments is a thing that really gets my goat, because the moment that you do that, you've effectively ended, that's the end of the Enlightenment, because people are only allowed to have the opinions that their race is allowed to have, and people's races are what determine the strength of their arguments. And if that's the way we're going to do arguments in this country, then, it's never going to get anywhere.
But Nick, it kills everything from rationality through the Enlightenment, and perhaps the worst victim of it is empathy. If you're not allowed to even try and find a point of connection with someone who looks different, thinks different, sound, you can't empathize with them. It really strikes at the heart of something as fuzzy but as important as empathy.
Gabriel, any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I hope that I'd like to challenge them to. I mean, Faith clearly said that she never wants us back on the platform.
She accused you of disrespecting the platform.
Yeah, she said I tried very hard. I encourage people to listen to it because because then they can judge for themselves whether I was being right or wrong. But I really don't want to burn the bridge. I think it's important to reach out, and this is partly what I'm drawing attention to with some of those listeners' responses. There are people who, for various reasons, listen to the Daily Friend, and there are people who listen to the Big Daddy Liberty Show, and there are people who listen to PowerFM and Metro FM, biggest radio show, which I've got to say I've been loving Metro FM through the pandemic, and Classic FM is dead. So what are you going to do? People find their channels, and I think as the IRR, we try to find people to communicate with them, and I don't accept that we are cancelled from PowerFM. I'm going to do what I can to politely return and firmly stick by my principles of non-racialism, which mean that I criticize people regardless of the color of their skin, that when I do so, I'm trying to be helpful, and that I welcome the same. We can't give up. I mean, there's a sort of like... there's a kind of triumphalism. I told one of my friends, he's like, "Oh, well done, you finally got cancelled." I was like, "Yeah, dude." It is funny because it's so predictable, but it's also not good enough. We've got to keep talking, and I think that the people who try and enforce those rules that you were describing, Nicholas, of indexing argumentative codes of conduct to race, and that have this effect that you're describing, Hermann, of destroying humanity. As an emotional connecting node. These are not the majority. These are the loudmouths. These are the people that are excellent at attracting attention to themselves. And I think that people in those positions are sensitive to ultimately to the listener. And as long as the listener's getting a chance to hear things like what we say now and then, it's keeping the flame alive, the flame of liberty, which is
one of my favorite data points from IRR polling over the last few years is the question of whether parents care about the race of their child's teacher, and Black South African parents really have had a harsh deal. If there's anyone who could really feel victimized by every possible province of life, a pretty good contender would be Black parents in South Africa. They don't get to choose the schools their kids go to. They don't get to have a say in the quality of the education. I mean, if you want to talk about marginalization, you would struggle to out, victim a Black South African parent. And it's constantly above 80% of Black South African parents say they don't care what the race of their child's teacher is, as long as the teacher is good. That is something quite promising, because it says so much. It says so much by a marginalized group of probably the most valuable thing that they have in their, for want of a better word, possession, their child's future. And they are willing to trust someone, not because they look a certain way, but because they can give their child a better life. Whenever you get despondent about the state of race relations, just remember what Gabriel said. These people are a loud minority, and there's a majority out there. And if you doubt that, get out there yourself. If you doubt our research, get out there. Walk around a township school. you'd be surprised what you would experience and find.
Indeed. Anyway, I can't say it any better than you guys have, so let's move on to our next topic. We talked a little bit last week about once again, the extension of the state of disaster, something that seemed unlikely because I believe the health department had basically agreed with our position and said, guys, why? There's no more need for this. But we hear today that, of course, the state of disaster was extended, and we hear today that President Ramaphosa is meeting with the country's 9 premiers and the mayors of major cities to decide on, as is described in a News 24 piece, the nation's next move in the fight against COVID-19. Now, I think Premier Alan Winde said from the Western Cape said that he would be going there to lobby Ramaphosa to end the state of disaster. But Gabriel, why was it extended? This is the question. I mean,
well, we got cancelled twice. I got cancelled twice. I got kicked out of PowerFM, and on Monday we did an episode saying, IRR beats Coronavirus Command Council, and by Friday we were beaten right back.
I'm just going to make a disclaimer here. I normally write the titles, but for that one, Gabriel suggested the title, so it's his fault.
I was trying to put in a passive voice, but I got carried away. So it is my fault. I'm sorry. I oversold it. I prematurely proclaimed victory, and it's terrible.
Well, no,
it really is terrible because there are. But
I don't think it's unreasonable for you to declare victory there.
The Department of Health is saying we don't need you, Command Council, and the Command Council is like, you need us. You need us a lot. What is that? All of this country's like top experts are saying we don't need this. Their argument is that we must keep the Command Council in place and the state of disaster in place because there are some regulations that Parliament doesn't know how to pass fast enough in order to keep them in place. And that's the sort of ban on rugby and soccer stadiums getting filled up, and it's the mandating of masks. Predominantly, it's also the slightly esoteric rule that the government can arrest you and detain you for a couple of days without trial if it thinks that you're symptomatic and positive. But we've asked the presidency if that's ever actually been implemented, and that question was not answered. Although we did get answers to many of our other questions. The main irritation is that from October last year, our attorneys were writing to the presidency to say, you guys need to be getting ready to get out of this. So it's not like they didn't see it coming. I mean, we predicted, we said there are various scenarios, but the most likely scenario is exactly the one that played out on the basis of our natural convalescent protection, of our vaccination rates, of how that sort of antivirus download measures against what the Brits had done. And they had no regulations for most of last year because of their successful vaccine campaign. And you could see what the result was. High case numbers, very low death and hospitalization numbers. And it seemed like we were destined for the same, and that the next wave would be triggered by a variant, which would match exactly the characteristics that it's had. Science is partly about seeing patterns and seeing how they play forward. And we just spoke to some good scientists and they gave us their reading. And we passed that on to the presidency, and we were not alone. So saying that they didn't see it coming is ridiculous. The other alternative is basically for them to admit that they have manufactured a reason. They have manufactured a state of disaster. I mean, I remember someone in campaigns had the headline that we got in a newspaper last year. The government is the state of disaster, and they're admitting it. They're like, why are we in a state of disaster? Not because of coronavirus, but because we don't know how else to do things. We are a disaster. So that's not good enough. We have to fight it. We are now looking to climb into court. There are DRSA is going, Soccer League, Business is going, a couple of others are going, and we think we might have to. I don't want to waste any money if other people are already going to do all the work, but because of this sort of paper trail we've created, we might have to climb in to help out there. It's devastating for South Africans that really need the ship to turn around. So it's kind of a joke because there are no regulations. It's for most of us, it's like a dragon that was dominating our lives, flying over the village and burning things and ruining things. But it has retreated into its lair. And now all you see is the little puffs of smoke. It's not really changing anything, excepting I can't go watch the Golden Lions play in Ellis Park.
Yes, so
The
can't stand
real-
within a meter of people.
Oh, God, yes, they've changed it from 1.5. But the real issue is that some people need the ship to turn around, and that's not going to happen as long as it's like this.
There's an interest. One of the cutest things I've ever heard is that there's a place in Cape Town where you can adopt guide dogs, puppies that failed guide dog school. And South Africa's socialists and communists sort of remind me of that. We're in Venezuela and Russia and Belarus. You've got actual hardcore people grabbing power and being quite terrifying. The ANC is like the puppy that failed guide dog school of communism, in the sense that it is adorably inept with disastrous consequences. There is, as the people in the comments have pointed out themselves, as my sister's 5-year-old daughter pointed out, there's really no reason for the NCCC, which Gabriel has been at the forefront of fighting against for the last few months, really calling for the abolition of it. There's no reason for it. And let's just contextualize. Yesterday, we had 9 COVID deaths on the 21st. We had 9 COVID deaths. Now, those are 9 awful occurrences, but people die. I'm really sad to say that, but people die. Our 7-day average is 24 deaths. We've got more murders currently, as of now, in this country on a daily basis, on average, than we have COVID deaths. And
I think we have 60 murders a day.
Yes, the last time I saw it was something in like 58. If we want to talk about disasters, we've got a lot of other things to talk about. How many jobs do we lose a day? How many kids suffer of malnutrition a day? How many women are raped every day? How many investments are liquidated or killed or withdrawn every day? If we want to talk about disasters, there are plenty disasters in this state. COVID is no longer one of them.
Right. Well said. Let's move very briefly on to our last topic. I'm just going to ask Hermann for his thoughts on this one. We see now that ActionSA has ejected Makhosi Khoza from the party. She was removed as the provincial chairperson recently, but there was a sort of assurance that no, this is just so she can focus more on her work in the eThekwini Council. However, there have long been rumors that the eThekwini Council only elected her to the, I think it's the Municipal Public Accounts Committee, because she had done a deal with the ANC. This was an accusation by some ActionSA members, and also I think the DA said the same thing. And now apparently there were people within ActionSA who are protesting the decisions of the leadership who were invoking Makhosi Khoza's name, and this seems to have been the final straw. So ActionSA had a disciplinary process and kicked her out of the party. Any thoughts very briefly, Hermann?
Yes, I think it's always very dangerous. This just goes to the idea it's always very dangerous for a party to recruit big hitters at the beginning of its life when it stands on no clear ideological platform. It doesn't have a clear vision. If your party's best offer consists of attracting heavy hitters from former parties, Abel Tau, John Moody, Makhosi Khoza, Fakey Mentor, Athol Trollop, then you could make a success of it. But I'd caution any voter against, too lightly accepting their party's bona fides. It's always dodgy when you've got more personality than policy in a political party. The second thing I would say is this isn't by no means the end of ActionSA, but I do think it indicates more deeper weaknesses, that the party is comprised of a patchwork of ideas, very much ideas conjured by the mind, in the minds of voters. And number 3, if I were an ActionSA voter, I would seriously consider contacting my party, asking them what the hell is going on. Why is ActionSA, a possible potential, wild dog party, a crucial player heading up to 2024, so vulnerable to not only disrupting its own ranks, but disrupting coalition agreements and governments? And the last thing, to ActionSA's credit, Nick, as you pointed out, hey, kudos to ActionSA for actually finding and kicking out an ANC plant. Other parties sometimes, make them leaders and then, jubilate when
I'm glad you brought up that last one, because I actually was going to do the unusual thing for me of coming to ActionSA's defense of this one, which is that quite frankly the DA could probably learn some lessons to kick people out who are actively working to sabotage the party. They'd be in a lot better space. They wouldn't have had all the problems they've had if they'd done that more, if they actually used any of their disciplinary processes instead of just waiting for people to leave.
Yeah, no, I just say I think it's great. Well done. I want ActionSA to do well. I always thought that they were better than Makhosi Khoza, and the evidence made it even more clear that she was not really serving the interest. So good for. Here's what I want. I want to see, because in the Daily Maverick there were a couple of analysts who, when one black person would leave the DA, they would say, this is black exodus. There's a black exodus from the DA. So now that a black leader has left ActionSA, I'm looking forward to all of the analysts who say there's a black exodus of people running away from ActionSA, and see what Michael Beaumont has to say about that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we'll be waiting a very long time for those think pieces, but maybe we're wrong. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. We will see you tomorrow on the Daily Fringe Show. And as always, have a most spectacular, wonderful, and fantastic day. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.